You're watching this because you want to get into philosophy. This is undeniably a noble pursuit, in my humble opinion, and you walk in the footsteps of some of the greatest thinkers in history. But when you're just getting started, it's easy to end up reading stuff that's dull or obscure or just plain boring. So, I've prepared a list of the top 5 philosophy books to get you started. 1. Bertrand Russell's The Problems of Philosophy. This is an absolute classic. It's been the standard introductory handbook to philosophy for over 100 years now, and for very good reason. In it, Bertrand Russell, possibly the most famous philosopher of the 20th century and notable playboy, breaks down some of the key philosophical topics you might want to delve into. Perhaps you want to ask how we know the external world exists, or maybe you'd rather delve into how we can prove our generalizations. Instead, you might want to ask how we can ever be certain of our morality. Russell's book tackles all of these problems and more. The real value of the book also comes in the analysis of philosophy itself. Russell wrote this book at a time when philosophy was having one of its many and pronounced identity crises. So along with an introduction to all these different areas of philosophy, the book encourages you to consider what philosophy on the whole is for. Which questions can it answer, and which can it not? Does the fact that a question is unanswerable make it any less worth asking? Are we forced to ask it regardless? This is a book that cuts to the core of what I think philosophy is all about. On top of that, it is written in incredibly readable language and covers a huge amount of ground in a relatively short time. After reading this, you should have a greater idea of the kinds of philosophical issues you're interested in, and that puts you on excellent footing to explore further. 2. Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. This is a true philosophical great by one of the most famous philosophers in history. Here, Aristotle tries to answer one of the world's biggest questions: how do we live this life well? The book is Aristotle's extensive answer to this. I picked this particular work for 2 reasons. The first is it gets you used to reading translated ancient Greek, and a lot of ancient philosophy was originally in Greek, so it gives you some experience there. The second and more important reason to read this book is that it addresses lots of issues that are immediately useful in everyday life. In this book, Aristotle talks about money management, how to learn new things. He talks about habit formation and about the value of good friends, and how to tell a true friend from a false one. This is not pie-in-the-sky philosophy. Reading this book will fundamentally change your approach to life. Whether you agree with some, all, or even none of what Aristotle says, it is borderline impossible to read this book and not think very deeply about how you go about your day-to-day existence. And this book does important work dispelling the notion that philosophy is a purely theoretical discipline with no practical applications. I am firmly of the belief that philosophy should be useful in some way, and nothing exemplifies this mindset more than this Aristotelian masterpiece. In terms of translations, I recommend the most recent Penguin one, because it's both reasonably faithful to the original text, but also incredibly readable. It does a fantastic job of putting Aristotle's thoughts in plain English in a way that few translations have been able to do. And if you read this book, please let me know on how your outlook changed after it. 3. Alain de Botton's The Consolations of Philosophy. To jump straight from ancient wisdom to modern pop philosophy, I would recommend Alain de Botton's The Consolations of Philosophy. De Botton is a very controversial figure, and some accuse him of simplifying philosophy too much for it to be valuable. But in the case of this book, I disagree. I think he's very good at taking certain key elements from the philosophies of various thinkers and making them relevant for modern life. In this work, de Botton takes pretty timeless challenges of human existence, being unpopular, feeling inadequate, going through tough times, and gives the views of different philosophers on the topic. He talks about how Socrates dealt with so much public scorn that he was eventually executed, how Schopenhauer tackled his feelings of inadequacy, and Nietzsche's wisdom for hard times. It's true that none of the chapters give you a comprehensive account of the thinker's overall views, but that's not the point. The point is to get an introduction to many, many thinkers in a very pleasurable and easy read. And I can almost guarantee that after reading this book, you'll want to delve into some of these philosophers more deeply. For instance, it was only after finishing this that I finally picked up a copy of Michel de Montaigne's essays, and I have been loving that. I also think that reading this book dispels a snobbish conception that pop philosophy has no value. I enjoy rigorous academic philosophy as much as anyone, but that does not mean that a more readable, less strict treatment of philosophy has no use. I think de Botton does an excellent job of making old philosophies relevant for modern life. Some of the great problems of humanity are indeed timeless, and this book definitely helps you feel less alone in your struggles. 4. Descartes' Meditations. One day, the great philosopher and mathematician René Descartes sat down in a warm room and decided he was going to question every single one of his beliefs in order to identify what he could be truly certain of. This is almost the stereotypical philosophy book. It's one of the many reasons philosophers are seen as arch questioners. It's the book where Descartes gives probably the most famous philosophical argument in history: I think, therefore I am. He does this at the end of a long section where he gives reasons to doubt all of his beliefs. He asks how we know we're not dreaming, what would happen if all of our beliefs were false, and what makes an idea clear and distinct from all the other ideas. It's a read that will leave you thinking in more precise terms than it found you in, and that's why it's the penultimate pick on this list. 5. For All X, An Introduction to Formal Logic. This is not a traditional philosophy book. It doesn't deal with big questions or give a guide on how to live life. It's instead a language manual. It introduces the reader to the languages of formal logic, which are purpose-made for thinking in a clearer and more detailed way. In it, you'll learn the languages of propositional and first-order logic. You'll learn how to properly form an argument, how to tell if an argument is valid or sound, and much more. If there's interest for it, I'm planning to make much more logic-based content in the future. But for now, I will just highly recommend this book. The best part is that it is free, and I'll leave a link for it in the description below. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you give at least one of these books a read. And stick around for more on philosophy to improve your life. And if you really liked it, then consider subscribing to my email list for my midweek thoughts.